Welcome to Tokyo Wave, recorded in a live studio in Harajuku, Japan, with your hosts Aaron and Parker. All right, everyone, welcome to episode 56 of Tokyo Wave. We're your hosts, Aaron Randall
and Parker Allen. Today we are joined again by a special guest, Dr. Steven Nagy, Asian public policy expert, political science professor, and politics commentator.
On Tokyo Wave, we bring you weekly updates from our studio in Harajuku.
Join us in segments featuring this week's top news,
political happenings,
business,
and other random garbage.
Here are this week's top news highlights.
SoftBank sues Rakuten and ex-employee over using leaked 5G technology info.
Nintendo profits boom as people stuck at home play games.
Wife arrested for alleged murder of Japanese Don Juan, silent during questioning. This week in Japan.
All right, let's get started with our top news item for this week. SoftBank sues Rakuten and ex-employee over using leaked 5G technology info.
Kyoto News has reported that Japanese wireless carrier SoftBank filed a damages suit against a former employee and rival Rakuten Mobile Incorporated for illegally using the plaintiff's 5G network technology information leaked by an ex-SoftBank employee.
In the lawsuit filed with the Tokyo District Court, SoftBank Group's mobile phone service subsidiary is seeking 1 billion yen, or 9 million USD, as part of its alleged damages totaling about 100 billion yen.
SoftBank is also demanding suspension of the use of Rakuten's base stations, which have allegedly been built based on the leaked information.
This is huge. I mean, basically SoftBank is telling Rakuten to stop using their technology, as in stop using their mobile base stations, as in basically dismantling their operation.
Right. So am I safe to assume Rakuten is similar to like UQ Mobile and that they just use the data packets from SoftBank, right?
No, initially Rakuten started doing that as a service, but they've actually made their own base stations and they're moving to become their own independent mobile phone operator with their own network. But SoftBank has alleged that they are building their own in-house network based on this leaked technology and therefore are infringing on their confidential information.
I got it. So easiest way to do it was just to steal it.
That's how it seems to be. So in response to the legal action, Rakuten said it has not confirmed any use of SoftBank's trade secrets in its internal investigation and will present its own views in the upcoming court hearings.
In January, police arrested Kuniaki Aiba, who joined Rakuten Group wireless unit soon after leaving SoftBank in December 2019, on suspicion of having transferred data on the plaintiff's 5G technology to his own email account in violation of Japan's unfair competition prevention law.
This is definitely going to be a very divisive lawsuit, and it could spell serious trouble for Rakuten as a new and up-and-coming operator, just the fourth major operator to enter the mobile phone market in Japan, which is highly competitive after Docomo, au, and SoftBank.
It's going to be tough to, SoftBank just has, I think, unlimited funds.
Rich people beating the crap out of each other. It's gonna be a fun one.
All right, and up next, Nintendo profits boom as people stuck at home play games.
The Associated Press has reported that Nintendo's profit for the fiscal year that ended in March jumped 86% on healthy sales of its Switch handheld machine as people stayed home due to the pandemic, turning to video games for entertainment.
Annual profit for Japanese maker of Super Mario and Pokemon games totaled 480 billion yen, that's about 4.4 billion USD, up from 260 billion yen the year before. The results released on May 6 were better than the company's internal profit forecast of 400 billion yen, about 3.7 billion USD.
That's a lot of billions.
Yeah.
So the results also revealed that Nintendo's sales have risen 34% to 1.7 trillion yen, or about 16 billion US.
In game software sales, demand remained strong for Animal Crossing New Horizons, with about 20 million units sold for cumulative sales of 32 million units. Mario Kart 8 Deluxe and Ring Fit Adventure were also popular titles.
Interesting naming conventions there, eh?
Yeah, for sure.
Kyoto-based Nintendo said that digital downloads for the Switch also did well, helping to support its bottom line.
Yeah, I'd say this is not going to stop, in my personal opinion.
Yeah, that's our Tokyo Wave hot stonk tip for the week. Buy some Nintendo because they are making a shitload of money.
Oh, for sure. All right, and up next, wife arrested for alleged murder of Japanese Don Juan, silent during questioning.
The Mainichi has reported that a 25-year-old woman arrested on suspicion of murdering her former husband, an elderly real estate mogul dubbed the Don Juan of Kishu for his colorful romantic exploits, has remained silent during questioning by police, which was disclosed by investigative sources.
Kosuke Nozaki died at the age of 77 at his home in Tanabe, Wakayama Prefecture on May 24, 2018. His former wife, Saki Sudo, is suspected to have murdered him by injecting him with a lethal dose of methamphetamine, causing him to die from acute stimulant intoxication.
Yeah, that's what usually happens.
Wow.
During voluntary questioning before her arrest, Sudo denied any involvement in the mogul's death, saying she knew nothing regarding the charges, the sources said. Wakayama Prefectural Police had not disclosed whether she had denied or admitted to the allegations.
During investigations to date, it has emerged that Sudo searched for stimulants on the internet, and that records on her phone showed interaction with an illicit dealer. At the same time, there are no witness testimonies regarding murder, and it has not emerged how Nozaki might have been made to ingest the stimulants. Prefectural police are carefully searching the corroborating evidence.
Yeah, this sounds like a very typical case of old wealthy man marries a pretty young woman, and pretty young woman gets tired of Japanese Don Juan, and the rest is the fodder of tabloids.
Yeah, I mean, this story I think was all over the news the past week, even on YouTube. I
remember back when this happened in 2018, and I mean, everybody was saying, she did it.
Mm-hmm,
I mean, it was just so, the writing was on the wall, sort of. It's not good to jump to conclusions in that situation because you never know the details, but apparently the police have been diligently getting their dossiers together, and they have jumped. So I guess it looks like she did the deed.
It's wild that the Google search history is so incriminating, It'd be funny if they did a survey of 20 other women that were in the same position. Hey, they all search for the same thing too. It's very common maybe amongst people situation.
Maybe wealthy old guys like methamphetamine. I mean, hey. I always thought it's strange that methamphetamine is the sort of illegal substance of choice for Japanese people who enjoy ingesting illegal substances. And of course, in America, methamphetamine is looked at as a drug that, addicts and people of very low social strata are associated with. But in Japan, it's the exact opposite. Fun fact, methamphetamine was originally formulated in Japan.
Oh, wow. All right, and coming up next, we have a special interview with Dr. Steven Nagy, Asian public policy expert, political science professor, and politics commentator.
You're now listening to Tokyo Wave.
Originally from Calgary in Canada, Dr. Steven Nagy provides macro-level geopolitical analysis on trends in the region to businesses, governments, and the media. He has published widely in peer-reviewed international journals such as China Perspectives, East Asia, the Journal of Asian Politics and History, and the International Studies Review on topics related to trade, nationalism, and China-Japan relations. Dr. Nagy has also published in think tank and commercial outlets such as the China Economic Quarterly and the World Commerce Review on trade and political risk.
Steven is a frequent commentator on political, economic, and security issues in East Asian politics and international relations in Japanese and international media outlets such as the New York Times, South China Morning Post, the Japan Times, the National Post, CNBC, Al Jazeera, Channel News Asia, and Australian Broadcasting Corporation.
And Tokyo Wave. Don't forget Tokyo Wave.
Yes, that's a good one.
Especially Tokyo Wave. Dr. Nagy is a senior associate professor in the Department of Politics and International Studies at International Christian University. He obtained his PhD in International Relations from Waseda University in Tokyo. Steven, thank you so much again for coming on Tokyo Wave.
I love to be back. It's always great to listen to your news broadcasts and just talk about what's happening in the region.
Don Juan, who'd have thunk it?
Don Juan, yeah.
So moving on to more serious topics. So just a few weeks ago, the Biden-Suga summit finally happened. First and foremost, did you think it was successful?
I think that we can look at it in a few different ways. From the Japanese point of view, I think that being the first foreign leader to meet President Biden at the White House was very significant. The White House and President Biden stressed all the key points that I think the Japanese would like to focus on in their foreign policy. That's the enduring nature of the alliance, that Article 5 of the alliance covers the Senkaku Islands, and that the United States is committed to those issues such as retrieving the kidnapped Japanese that were kidnapped by the North Korean government, to dealing with denuclearization of North Korea. These are all issues the Japanese, I think, are very happy about in terms of the visit. But I think taking a granular look, I think the Japanese are probably disappointed with the lack of media coverage in the United States about the visit. And that says a lot about the public's view about the importance of the alliance, their distraction with COVID, and I think the overhype about the dangers of China. So I think that there's lots to like about the meeting, but I think when we look at it again from the U.S. side, that we should be thinking about, how can we move the alliance to the forefront of American minds.
I think that's a really deep insight, and also it reflects my own view that the summit was really looked at as this magic bullet that was going to help Prime Minister Suga also domestically with a deeply unsatisfied electorate in the light of upcoming elections that we're going to have for the lower house here in Japan, which will also deeply impact his political future as Prime Minister of Japan. I think that it definitely was a good summit. Lots of great things came out of the summit, but I do not think that it served as the magic bullet that the Japanese government was hoping for in terms of helping the domestic political situation and also raising the profile of U.S.-Japan relations again to the American audience as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I agree with that. And I think we need to separate the Suga administration from the Japanese government in a sense, because I think the Ministry of Foreign Affairs was very happy with the meeting. The Ministry of Defense was very happy with the meeting. But the Suga administration, it didn't get that, that methamphetamine kind of punch that he was looking for in terms of getting that domestic support for the Japanese public, but also in the LDP.
Maybe they should be reaching out to Saki Sudo.
If she's the supplier, maybe that's where they should be going.
She's got better connections than Biden.
Suga should have gone to Florida.
Some other take-homes that I think is probably important is there was a joint statement on Taiwan. And that's a critical issue right now because our Chinese friends are putting tremendous pressure on Taiwan and putting tremendous pressure on countries that are speaking about Taiwan as a country or as a region that should be joining the WHO. And Japan resisted a stronger statement. And the statement really stresses this idea of peace and stability in Taiwan-China relations, and that any kind of resolution of that relationship should be done through peaceful dialogue. This suggests also that the United States and Japan are not completely on the same page of the book in terms of managing the relationship with China. The United States would like a harder line. Japan has to thread the needle. Its economic partner, about 26 to 27% of Japan's total trade is with China, where the United States is no more than 5 or 6%. Very different dynamics in terms of trade, and this informs their decisions about how they engage with China.
And I think from a regional security perspective as well, I mean, obviously the United States can almost afford to be as tough on China as they want to because the Pacific Ocean is really big.
Absolutely. And their biggest trading partner isn't China. It's actually, those great Canadians and great Mexicans. And frankly, the United States does more than 85% of its trade in North America, which creates a kind of economic autonomy that gives it different choices, where Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, all the Southeast Asian countries, Australia, their biggest trading partner by far is China, and they just can't, take the same approach.
I think we're also seeing this play out in recent diplomatic developments as well, this different stance on Taiwan. Of course, Taiwan was at the top of the agenda at the G7 foreign ministers meeting that recently took place in London. Obviously, China wasn't too happy about that. So, Stephen, are we headed into another world war?
No, not at all. But I think that what's critical is the G7 members, even those ones that are trying to thread a needle with China to maintain their economic partnership, like Germany, Japan. At the G7 Foreign Ministers Summit, they came together and they explicitly said that Taiwan should join the WHO, that issues regarding Taiwan should be dealt with peacefully. They talked about the Uyghur problem and the tremendous human rights problems in parts of China. And this is something that I think is, it's the first time this has happened. That'd be such a strong statement. And it's going to create a real tense relationship between China and those key partners that are, trying to balance their security concerns about China, but the incredible economic opportunity that also comes with China.
I mean, the Biden administration, I think we were talking about this before the beginning of the Biden administration, and we sort of expected the Biden administration to take a strong approach on China. And I think, given the rhetoric so far, the Biden administration has exceeded those expectations, and they're being really tough on China. But the question is that the right tact to take?
Well, I think that the Biden administration has really decided that they really need to think about how they engage in China through the lenses of cooperation, competition, and potential of those red lines that, there's going to be serious disagreement with. And with that, I think they've done that. They had the climate summit where President Xi did come, and they did make some joint commitments to how to deal with environmental challenges. And that represents that area of cooperation. In terms of competition, I think Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State, has made some very explicit statements saying that we're happy to compete, but we want to compete through a shared understanding of the rules, and that we want to make sure that you follow the rules. And that, I think, is a fair statement. And I think they've also drawn those red lines, and the red lines include the Senkaku Islands, includes forceful reunification of Taiwan. I think the red lines do include internal issues from the Chinese perspective of what's happening to those Uyghur people in terms of re-education camps, the real end of the Sino-British agreement in Hong Kong, where today Hong Kong is not the place it was a year and a half ago after the adoption of the national security law. That one country, two systems model has been fractured at best and destroyed at worst. And again, I think that this is the right way to go. You can't have a zero-sum relationship with any country, but in particular, China. China is a population of 1.4 billion people. It will be the biggest economy in terms of purchasing power, and it will be the biggest economy in terms of absolute size in the next 5 to 10 years. So you got to find you have to have a multiple track relationship, and some of it's good, some of it's competitive, and some of it's filled with friction.
So, I have to ask Steven, since you're here, I have had lots of stuff pop up in my YouTube feed, whatever, about talks of China invading Taiwan. I know you just kind of covered a bit of it, but I mean, is there any legitimacy to these kinds of tabloid headlines?
Well, there's no 0% in anything. We had an election of in the United States of an individual that, as president, that had no political experience. So I think most observers would have said that person wouldn't have been president. And I think the same with Taiwan and a potential forced reunification. But I think over the next few years, China is not interested in some kind of military attack or forced reunification for Taiwan. The political calendar isn't working. This year is the 100th anniversary of the Communist Party. And if there was some kind of forced reunification during this period, it would create tremendous pressure on China, and China would lose face, at least in the international community, and that would resonate domestically. There'd be sanctions. Most likely there'd be economic turmoil, and again, this would not bode well for the Communist Party. In 2022, we have the Winter Olympics in Beijing. Again, this is another face opportunity for China to show how they've risen, how they've developed, the success of their political system, their economic system. And in the same year, we have the 20th Communist Party Congress, which basically sets the agenda for the next 5 to 10 years of where China is going, what's going to happen. These are incredibly sensitive periods. And as a result, China doesn't want to create the conditions that could disrupt these, I think, critical face, these important issues that will kind of give China a brand, a positive brand, but also set the agenda for the next 5 to 10 years.
On the topic of, branding for China, do you think that we might see a paradigm shift in the next year or 2 years with the CCP internally, and that, they'll start working more with the US? They'll stop, the whole Uyghur thing will just slowly phase out and go away. Like maybe like all these things that we're worrying about and looking at China and getting more and more worried, maybe these things, is there any chance that these could just fade away because China's like, okay, we just have to align with the rest of the world now?
Well, I think most observers, including myself, see the next 10 years really as a very dangerous period in Sino-US relations for multiple reasons. The downward pressures on the Chinese economy are continuing to deepen. Demographic issues. Now we have global supply chains diversifying, not decoupling from China, but selectively diversifying. And China's not in a good place in terms of its global reputation. I think partly because of the COVID-19 pandemic and both real and misinformation about it being China's responsibility, but also its wolf warrior diplomacy within the region, which really is putting fear in many countries about what is China's long-term intentions. But in the United States as well, I think we need to really think about what is the direction of the United States, its domestic political systems. Where will the United States be in 4 years? Will Mr. Biden or Ms. Harris be elected as president? And will that mean continuity in this kind of multilateralist, internationalist foreign policy? Or will we have some kind of Trump candidate or potentially Mr. Trump come back? And what does that mean for foreign policy? And actually, I think none of us know.
So kind of on the topic of this, international branding, in June, we have the main G7 summit, which will occur in Cornwall in the UK. So with no Abe or Trump and Merkel in the twilight of her 15-year tenure as Chancellor of Germany, who do you think is going to take center stage?
Oh, that's a great question. So I think it will be President Biden. It'll be his first foreign trip abroad. This will be the first time the G7 leaders have met in more than a year and a half together. And I think that it really is kind of a coming out party where they will come out in terms of a shared message. They'll come out in terms of thinking about again, there's the preparation up to the G7. And as we were talking about before, the foreign ministers have just got together and said, we have the same position on Taiwan and we have these shared concerns about China and Russia as well. When the prime ministers and presidents and chancellors meet, this is really, really significant. I think there'll be great relief because the former occupant of the White House will not be there. We won't have this historic photo of all the leaders looking at President Trump in consternation about what he's doing and what he's thinking.
No tight-fisted handshakes.
No tight-fisted handshakes. So I think that's significant. And it will demonstrate that these 7 countries are on this, I think, mostly on the same page of the book about some critical issues. The G7 will also have 3 other countries coming to the G7 meeting. South Korea, Australia, and India as observers. And again, this is significant. And I think sometimes it's talked about in terms of the D10, the alliance of 10 democracies. I think we shouldn't put too much into that. But I think it's important that all these countries are coming together in terms of forming a critical mass of countries from different cultures and backgrounds, right? That are going to probably have a shared voice about many issues. Hand in hand with the G7 and these 3 countries coming, there'll also be on the sidelines a Quad summit. And I know you guys have talked about the Quad many times, right? The relationship between the United States, Japan, India, and Australia. Well, they had a virtual leader summit in March, which came away with some really important public good take-homes. They're going to accelerate vaccine development and distribution of vaccine to emerging countries, as well as some other strong commitments. So this will be the first time they meet in public as well. Mm-hmm. So I think that seeing the G7 summit of world leaders is important, but seeing all these other pieces of the puzzle come together at the same time is also critical for us to be thinking about.
Shifting gears to the domestic situation here in Japan, now it is less than 3 months until the Tokyo 2020 Olympics and Paralympics are supposed to happen. Obviously, there is a lack of enthusiasm among the domestic Japanese population, but how do you think the situation with the games will play out on the world stage?
Well, I'm personally hopeful that the Olympics will go through. I think the Japanese will do an excellent job. I think it'll be a safe Olympics. I think that the Japanese have studied what's happened in Australia in terms of the Open and seeing how they managed viruses and bringing athletes in and getting them to train. So I think all the lessons are there. But as you mentioned, the Japanese public aren't supportive of the Olympics coming and holding the Olympics. And this is a real challenge for leaders because I think they have the choice of postponing it or potentially postponing it, canceling it, which would be a disaster fiscally, but I think a disaster in terms of what it means in terms of the broader narrative about democratic countries being able to hold successful events in the midst of a pandemic. And, if Japan doesn't hold it, which country they'll be holding a major event the next time. It will be the 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics. And I don't think that's the dynamics that Japan wants to have, but I don't think that's the dynamics that many countries want to have. But it leads me to the question, and when we were talking before we started the podcast, is, what were the Japanese really enthusiastic about in terms of international events being held in Japan pre and post event? When I thought about the World Cup rugby, there wasn't much enthusiasm, but the Japanese loved the Rugby World Cup. When you think about the 1998 Nagano Winter Olympics or the 2008 World Cup.
That was 2002.
Between the Koreans and the Japanese. There wasn't much enthusiasm before and after, but during the event, it was great. It was great parties everywhere. So, I'm not sure if, how to manage these or think about the Japanese public's support for any event, including these Olympics, despite the COVID-19 pandemic. But I want to hear what you guys think about this.
Well, more than anything else, I've been watching the Vegas betting odds, and they're 5-1 in favor of the Tokyo Olympics happening. So, Las Vegas always decides these important global decisions. So it looks like they're going to happen, but the question is how they're going to happen. And we already know that we're not going to have international spectators allowed to come to Japan to watch the games in person. Now the question, of course, is whether domestic spectators will be allowed to come and watch the games in person. And of course, with no international spectators or potentially no domestic spectators, it's looking increasingly like we might be facing a spectatorless Olympic Games.
So my take on it, the 5-1, I'd probably be that one. Just to be honest with you, I was watching a panel of Japanese scientists reviewing the data with the current spike in COVID cases, the rate of increase, and we're on another huge uptake, not just case-wise, but rate of increase wise. I think it will be decided this month. I think by the end of this month, we'll have a definite yes or no. If this rate of increase continues in Tokyo and in Osaka, I think that the government will have to come out and cancel the Olympics, just because it would just be too unsafe to do anything, right?
Yeah, here I think, that the IOC does have a role. I think that they should be out there speaking publicly that we need to find a way to postpone this. And they postponed it 1 year. And obviously it wasn't enough. Nobody knew the pandemic would be around this long. Nobody knew the vaccine rollout would be the way it is. And frankly, the Japanese vaccine rollout is not good. But the reality of most countries, it's not going to be, the vaccine rollout's not going to be complete before the Olympics happen. Right, so I think this is really important. And in this sense, the IOC should say, listen, it's not realistic to hold it this year. We would like to move it maybe a year or 2 years from now, so that the Japanese people and residents like us that have invested our money in holding the Olympics can really see this come to fruition. I think that's really critical, because if we don't do that, or if the IOC doesn't do that, what is the next message for cities that want to host the Olympics? They could be potentially canceled. What city is going to be willing to put? It's not pocket change anymore, right? It's billions of dollars to be invested into the Olympics. What city's going to want to do that with the risk of postponement? And I think the IOC has to be out there and championing Japan's case for postponing it.
We do know that through recent news reports that IOC's president Thomas Bach will be joining the Olympic torch relay for a ceremony in Hiroshima on May 17th. He's also expected to meet with the Japanese Prime Minister Suga in Tokyo on the following day. And so this is supposed to be an event where President Bach is going to support Tokyo's decision to hold the games, and it's supposed to be a raw sort of moment for Japan's resolve to host the games to actually happen. But of course, as long as there are tabloids, there are some reports that maybe there will be a different development that happens on the 17th and or 18th of May. Either case, we will know very soon after this episode is released, ironically.
Yeah, so I mean, I think there's definitely a disconnect too between Western countries like the U.S., who are having, arguably a successful rollout of the vaccine. When I even talk to people back in the U.S., they're kind of shocked that Japan is quote unquote behind. But this is not just Japan. South Korea, their target to get everyone vaccinated, I heard, is January of next year. So I think there's just so many logistical issues with the vaccine. I mean, if they had an infrastructure to get everyone vaccinated and, do antibody testing as well for all the athletes here in Japan, I think that would be great. But from what I've heard, they don't have that infrastructure set up. It's not ready to go at this point, and we're just closing in. So
yeah, it'll be a tragedy if the Olympics are canceled. I think it's a win-win, or it's the right decision to postpone it. But if it's not postponed, I'll be there to support it. And I hope the athletes do great and the Japanese succeed in putting on a great show. And Japan has the ability to be a bit of a game changer in changing the dynamics. It's goes back to your question about branding, right? It has a great soft cultural brand. soft power. And I think that there's a lot of interesting ways that Japan could probably hold the Olympics with few spectators or virtual spectators or, some kind of hybrid. And this is where that creative side of Japan could come in and say, this is another way we can do it. And I don't have any, I'm not privy to any knowledge about how this is working, but I think that, again, this is another way to brand Japan and to create a great brand, despite being in the midst of a pandemic.
We can't talk about the situation that Japan is currently facing without doing a deeper dive on the current situation regarding Japan's vaccine rollout. Still, at the time of recording this episode, less than 1% of the Japanese population has been vaccinated, which is still very lagging behind other developed countries. What do you think is going to happen with this recent resurgence in cases and the resulting state of emergency? And do you think that Japan will be able to quickly rebound from this pandemic?
That's a tough question, Parker, Aaron. So I think Japan did very well last summer. The numbers went down, and then we hit November, and we saw the rates spike, and they spiked until mid-January when they had another declaration of or state of emergency, and the numbers dropped again, and then it was cherry blossom season, and we saw the spike again, and people have become nonchalant about social distancing, about wearing masks, about going out and drinking. Even in the community where I live, there's people on the street drinking still, even though you're not supposed to be drinking in public or in shops. So I think that we're in a very difficult situation. And, I assume once the Japanese get an effective, reliable way to distribute vaccines, that it will happen very rapidly. I'm not sure where the bottleneck is right now. And I guess, Aaron, you were talking about this before, right? But what is the bottleneck? I really don't understand. In a normal season, we all, October, get our flu shot, and it happens pretty quick. Where's the bottleneck here that's preventing Japan from engaging in mass vaccination? The second point about virus variations, I think this is a real concern. We're seeing virus variations emerge here in Tokyo and Osaka, and we've seen what's happened in India, which I think we might talk about later. This is a concern, and I hope that the Japanese government can have much clearer instructions to people about how to behave, provide that financial assistance to businesses so that they can keep people at home longer, and provide that protective equipment to people so that they can work safely and prevent the spread of viruses. At this stage, I'm just not confident in any of those.
Speaking of bottlenecks, one thing that has recently made headlines here in Japan is the reservation system for the elderly to get their vaccines. Just yesterday morning in Tokyo, actually, NTT had to limit phone access because there was an overwhelming volume of calls of people trying to reserve vaccines for the elderly. And I think we're seeing that the system that the government is using for distributing these vaccines is turning out to be one of those big bottlenecks. Of course, up until recently, everyone was talking about the limited supply, with the EU needing to approve every pallet of vaccines that left the Pfizer facility in the EU to Japan. And of course, with Pfizer remaining the only vaccine that is approved for distribution in Japan, that was seen as a huge bottleneck. But now we've seen that Pfizer has accepted a much more aggressive rollout schedule. So the supply is supposedly no longer an issue. But now, of course, this reservation system and the phone lines going down, I mean, that doesn't bode well for the Japanese vaccination rollout schedule in terms of getting people scheduled to have an appointment to get this vaccine.
Yeah, I agree with you, but I think at the local government level, they're just overwhelmed. And I'll give you an example. So where my kids go to school, there was a friend of my kid was identified as being exposed. So they identified his peer group, and we were told to get a test. We did all that kind of stuff. Fortunately, it was negative. And we did that the same day. And, he could go back to school the next day. He had a certificate. He was negative. But we got a call from the local government 7 days later, and they say, oh, you should get a test and stay home. And we're going, what? We got the test last week. You should have told us 7 days ago. And I'm not criticizing the government. I just think that they're so overwhelmed. There's so many cases out there that there's a bottleneck in terms of the number of people that are able to get the information out and communicate to people. And I just don't know how to overcome that either.
That's a really good point. I mean, the Japanese bureaucracy is renowned for being efficient and doing more with less. But in this pandemic situation, the limited human resources that both the national government and the health ministry and related ministries have, and also the local resources at the local level. And this is also something that's been echoed in news reports on bottlenecks, in that local governments are being expected to do a lot with the rollout of the vaccines in their local areas, but they have limited, if any, resources to manage these complicated systems.
It's tough. And, this leads to a whole bunch of questions. So what happens in 5, 10, and 15 years as the demographics become even more severe in Japan? How will they deal with these kinds of issues moving forward? So, we're seeing this in the COVID pandemic, but, 10, 15 years in the future, there will be some other kind of pandemic or natural disaster. And as those human resources continue to dwindle, how does Japan manage these issues? And, the COVID-19 pandemic is a bit of a crystal ball for many problems in the next 10 to 15 years.
I think the slow rollout in Japan, everyone's trying to figure out what the source and the cause of it is. Global media and local media here in Japan too, and people in the Japanese government. Many are very angry, and there's a lot of possibilities for why, but we don't really know yet. And as you were saying, Stephen, like, this pandemic has really exposed a lot of holes that we have in our various democracies and other governmental systems across the world. And this will absolutely happen again. I mean, Bill Gates was ranting about this 6 years ago or so. Like, the thing that's going to get us first will be a pandemic. And another in 10
or a
years,
costly divorce.
Yeah.
Aaron, I want to step in there because you talked about this as a democratic issue, and I just think this is the wrong way to talk about it.
Okay.
All right. I think that democratic countries have done really well in terms of dealing with the pandemic. Australia, New Zealand, from the start to now, even the vaccine rollout, it's been not bad. Other countries like South Korea and Japan have had mixed bag of results. Taiwan, I think they've had 6 or 9 deaths.
Wow.
Amazing, right? When I look at my friends on Facebook in Taiwan, they're not wearing masks. They're out there doing what they want to do. And when we think about, authoritarian states have done well, we think about China's done well, they had 5 about 5,000 deaths, and, people are living a relatively normal life now. Well, that's true. When we turn north to Russia hasn't done very well, and it's an authoritarian state. So I think we really need to be careful about that, both in terms of managing the pandemic, but also vaccine roll out. Some mixed results, and government systems don't matter as much as good governance.
Just because they're democratic doesn't mean they're necessarily going to be better or worse at rollout, is what you mean.
Yep.
It's governance, not government. Thank you, Johnny Cochran. Talking about the situation globally and even regionally in Asia, I mean, we can't have this discussion today without talking about some very serious situations that are happening elsewhere in Asia right now. We have the situation in India, talking about the pandemic with this sudden spike in pandemic infections. And it really looks to be a dire situation that is really roiling the entire country right now. And also, it's not the pandemic, but with Myanmar, we have this continuing unrest in the aftermath of the February military coup. How should we be looking at these developments, and what's going to happen next?
Well, I think India represented a great hope for democratic states in emerging countries. I think India represented a great hope in terms of an economy that could balance the size of the Chinese economy. And I think that some of that has been shattered thinking about what's happened to India over the past 2 weeks in terms of the explosion in positive cases. They started in the cities like Delhi or Mumbai, and it's a tragedy. I've personally lost friends, and many friends have been infected there. And there are people that are of the same social position as I am, which you wouldn't expect, which suggests that the situation there is very severe. The trend right now is, the people that are in the big cities that come from the rural communities, well, they don't have jobs. The lockdown is affecting their lives. They don't have a way to make, to eat and feed and feed themselves and save money. So their reaction is to go back to their rural communities where they have a network of people to take care of them. And I think the greatest fear for Indians is that that flow of people, the reverse migration to the rural communities, would also bring the COVID virus and the variants, and that could expose India and its important agricultural sector. We should be clear that India's economy is primarily driven by the agricultural community, right? I mean, a great deal of its population is based are still subsistence living and living in agricultural communities. And what happens to India's food sources? What happens to social stability when the people that are growing the food are getting sick? This is just such a complex problem, and it just pains me to think about what's happening in India. It's not a good situation, and my thoughts and prayers are there for India, as well as other South Asian countries, because I know this is moving to Nepal as well.
Yeah, the most recent news that I saw regarding India was in New Delhi, and I think 1 in every 2 people is testing positive. The hospitals have completely run out of resources. So now community centers and doctors are going to the community centers, and they're trying to find oxygen tanks just from the community, just to get people on oxygen so they don't die. There's been, the BBC has had a lot of headlines basically saying that for Indians, especially in New Delhi, this is like end of the world kind of scenario right now. It's really, really bad, it seems like.
It's devastating. I'm looking at the statistics right now. On March the 7th, the 7-day average of COVID deaths was 99 in India. Today, the 7-day average on May the 7th is 4,000.
That's what we know of. I don't think those statistics are reliable. And the best way we're going to be able to find out, actually how many people died will be looking on year death rates. And I think Russia's illustrative example, Russia's had an extra 500,000 people die in the past year, above it, the normal trends of mortality, which suggests that 500,000 people have died of COVID in Russia. So next year, when we do a population census in India, I think that we're going to be shocked by the numbers of people of all ages and backgrounds that have succumbed to this virus. And again, it shows you how serious it is. If governments don't govern well, and I'm not an Indian specialist, but I think politics has created part of this problem. Religious festivals have been allowed to go on, where an enormous amount of social distancing was ignored. Masks were ignored, and the result is this super spreader moment. And our Indian friends are really suffering now.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because India was one of the first major manufacturers of the vaccine, but a lot of that went over to the United States. So now they're asking Biden to bring back a lot of the vaccine that they actually manufactured. There's so many logistical issues with managing this pandemic. It's really hard to point at one thing and say this is the reason why this is happening here. Similar to Japan, like everyone's trying to figure out why is the rollout so slow here. There's so many complex moving parts, and yeah, some of them are very bureaucratic and involve the governance of the country. But then there's also the business and the logistical side too, and yeah.
I don't think I think the pandemic will unleash not only it's unleashed this health disaster, but I think moving forward it's going to unleash a lot of social instability, in particular in emerging countries like India. As I said, when the rural community can't produce food, that creates instability. I mean, that's just it's going to come, and that's maybe the third wave that I think we should be concerned about in India and other emerging states. It's very, very serious. I hope that Japan and other countries can find ways to help the Indians manage this issue.
Talking about political instability, that brings us back to the situation going on in Myanmar. I feel like we haven't seen as much news as we did, of course, a few months ago. But have you been keeping up with the situation as the unrest continues?
It looks like the coup leaders have locked in their gains. I think that we're seeing a gradual attrition by the pro-democracy protesters. I think what we've seen is that the international community is not able to collectively put pressure on the military government. I think just last week, ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, came together and the coup leader showed up, and the ASEAN countries collectively asked for a change and a movement back towards a semblance of good governance. But it's not going to happen. I think that Southeast Asian countries themselves are challenged democratically. Thailand is also a form of military leadership, so they can't have a loud voice in pressing back against Myanmar. The Philippines with President Duterte is not exactly an example of a liberal democratic state. Cambodia and Laos, they are, again, not democratic leaders. Vietnam is led by a socialist party. So who's left to defend the interests of Myanmar? Indonesia, which doesn't have really the leadership position. Brunei, which is a kingdom. And Singapore, which is a kind of a soft authoritarian or semi-democratic state. So I think what's happening in Myanmar is really locked in, and I think there's challenges moving forward in terms of what's going to be the impact on the economy, in terms of the healthcare, because they haven't dealt with the pandemic well, and in terms of investment in that very important country.
Lots of heavy stuff happening around the region here in Asia. It's almost sort of surreal to be watching this from Japan. Of course, we talk about the Olympics. We talk about the kind of lack of the vaccination situation here in Japan, but we're still in relative safety and democracy, and we love to complain about it, but it's hard to look at the situation abroad and not think that here in Japan we are relatively sitting very pretty.
Yeah, I think that when we look at the coverage of the pandemic in Japan and life in Japan, I do think that, of course, there's many problems in any country, including Japan, but the pandemic here has had a very light footprint for most. Of course, for the people that have lost lives and family members because of COVID, that's pretty serious. But I mean, people are still going to the hot springs and going up to Takao-san for a hike and going to university, and their kids are going to school, and the infection rates are relatively low. I mean, Tokyo's a city of 40 million people. 1,000 infections a day is actually not that much, right? It's about putting into perspectives, but we don't want this to explode as it did in India and other countries. So I think we're fortunate to be where we are during this pandemic.
Absolutely. And yeah, Stephen, it's always so great getting your feedback and your point of view on everything that's going on, especially here in East Asia, Southeast Asia, South Asia.
There's lots happening. There's lots happening culturally, economically, politically, security-wise. Keep your eyes on it, right? But we should probably end with some kind of positive.
Yeah, for sure.
Right? I mean, what's happening in your guys' lives in terms of something positive?
Well, I will say business does seem to have picked up back in Tokyo. It was like dead. I'd say from last May to maybe sometime early this year. But in the past like couple months, I've noticed like companies and businesses, they want to come back. They want to start doing business again, investing in new projects. Obviously, we have the state of emergency, but as you said, a lot of people are just nonchalant about it and just kind of ignoring it. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I won't comment, but it does seem like business to a certain extent is starting to come back into motion here in Tokyo.
Yeah, and I think we see the situation in the United States with the vaccination rollout happening very proactively, and things are starting to go back to normal. And there's already talk about this economic resurgence that's going to come and is already starting to happen. I mean, look at the stock market. Like,
look at Dogecoin.
The stonk picks are so hot.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a lot to look forward to. I think, with our current situation in Japan under another state of emergency and seeing these case numbers starting to go down a little bit, but still not down to the levels that will be required in order to get out of this current state of emergency that we're in right now. I feel like there is light at the end of the tunnel. Obviously, the precarious situation with the Olympic Games and with the vaccine rollout schedule continue to be this perpetual Debbie Downer syndrome that I think everyone in Tokyo and Japan at large is facing right now. But I think we're going to get out of this in the next few months. Of course, knock on wood. But I think we're all ready to be beyond this pandemic. And we can only hope that our friends in India and across South Asia will also be able to overcome the extremely dire situation that they're in right now.
Yeah, I agree with both of you. Just to add to that, I think what has come to light and I think is really positive in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic and recovery is that I think leading states understand that we're not going to have to just recover from our health issues associated with the pandemic, but we're going to have to rebuild our societies, the social cohesion. We're going to have to support the middle class and those people that are struggling in the middle class, that we're going to have to deal with the weaker elements of our society. And I think this is something new. It's something new in the United States. It's something new in many countries. And I think that this is fundamentally a great thing. And, we didn't learn that lesson in the 1997 Asian financial crisis. Arguably, we didn't learn it with the global financial crisis in 2009. But I think that the leaders have learned that lesson. And this is actually one of the reasons why the UK is holding the G7 in Cornwall and not in London or, these first tier cities. It's to bring the leadership back to ordinary citizens, to see what's happening in ordinary communities. And I think that is the trend of political leaders moving forward, is that if you want to solve global problems, you got to help the middle class. You got to help those people that are struggling with the rapidity of technological change, globalization. So for me, that's the positive. And I think that gives me a lot of hope. And I think that moving forward, we're going to see those weaker parts of our society start to, shine more. And I think that's something that we should look forward to. And that speaks to Aaron's point about creativity and business opportunity. More people that are positive and are being pulled out of poverty and out of marginalized position societies means a much more dynamic society. And I think what you spoke to, Parker, about the economy potentially booming soon. Again, that boom has to be more equally distributed. And if political leaders are thinking about that, as well as businesses. This is great news for our societies and stability.
Yes, of course. Right now, it's like we're training the AI. We're learning.
We're just training the data right now, right? Yeah. And guys, literally in less than, I think 5 or 7 years, we're going to have Starship Earth by SpaceX, which is going to allow us to travel. Sorry, this is just totally random. But talking about progress, technologically speaking, sociologically speaking, we're going to be able to travel from New York to Shanghai, New York to Tokyo in 30 minutes. This is a reality that, Elon Musk and all these companies that he owns is really pushing. I don't know if you guys have heard of Starship Earth, but I really think we could come out of this and it will be a brave new world. It will blow the socks off of everything that we've seen or known to be true.
We have the technology. We're going to go to the moon. Elon Musk is going to put Dogecoin on the moon. It's going to be awesome.
Did you guys apply for that moon mission?
To go and do bong rips on the moon with Yusaku Maezawa and Elon Musk.
I applied.
You applied?
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
And I wrote the essay how I'm going to solve the world's problems and going around the moon. And that would be a dream, I tell you. Spaceship Earth. I want to go to Spaceship Moon.
Yeah. They have the tech, and they think it's going to be a reality. They're saying it's going to be a reality in the next, to the moon included, 10, 15 years out. So
that would be great. We could do the first Tokyo Wave on the moon.
Ooh.
Well, Steven, I don't think we applied. So please bring some moon rocks back for us.
I don't know about moon rocks, but I might bring some moonshine.
We've got that. Well, again, thank you so much for coming back on Tokyo Wave. This is always a huge learning opportunity, both for us and our listeners. And thank you so much, Steven. It's always a pleasure.
Parker, Aaron, I always enjoy talking to you guys. And I love your show. I listen to it. And to be able to contribute is a real privilege. Thanks.
Yes, thank you so much.
And sorry about talking about poop last week.
Didn't listen to that part.
Hey, listeners, that's right. You listener right there.
Who do you think should be our next guest on Tokyo Wave? Let us know. Drop us a line at wave@tokyowave.jp.
We hope you enjoyed Tokyo Wave.
If you haven't already, you can subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, and YouTube.
Join us again next week on Tokyo Wave.